brings a wonderful rush of colour to the trees of the park and a natural harvest of acorns, sweet chestnuts and beech mast for the wildlife. As well as acorns and sweet chestnuts carpeting the ground, colourful fungi emerge in the autumn. The park has over 400 species of fungi, many of them rare, including fly agaric. Wild mushrooms and toadstools are not just good to look at. They are another rich source of food for deer, mice, squirrels and insects. They also help to clean up the environment, mopping up bacteria and cleansing soil in preparation for the next year's new growth in spring.
Right, we're going into the Isabella. It's a great place to find fungi, one of the best in the park. We're looking at this log here. There's several fungi on, but the one I'm going to show you is the lumpy bracket. It's annual, but it survives for another year. But can you see the green on top? That's algae, and there's some bits of moss because it's rather soft. The surface is soft. This is the underside of the lumpy bracket. It's got a maze-like set of pores, and that's where the spores are produced. And look how it's grown through the grass. The grass was coming up below the log.
Now these are very pretty, Janet. What are these?
These are a very common fungus that you'll find on logs. It's always worth looking on. Wet logs have to be wet because fungi need water to grow. You can see the bands here of different colours, which is why it's called turkey tail. If you imagine that as the tail of a turkey. One of the reasons I don't like dens in the park is because by stacking logs against a tree, the log dries out, and fungi need water. They need wet logs.
So we have some very pretty little creamy white, well I call them mushrooms, but fungi here, Janet. So
they're puffballs.
They're puffballs, there we go.
Puffballs. They're not ready to puff yet. If you look inside there, this is one I've picked, you can see that it's grey, and when it's ripe to puff, that's the ones where you puff them and the spores come out, but it's not ready yet. These are growing and they're recognisable because they've got these spines on. Again, when it rains, sometimes the spines get washed off, but that's recognisable. I like the fact that this one I've picked, can you see the white threads? If I hold it against the black, the white threads, that's the mycelium. So as I pulled it out, picked it up, that is hanging out. It's also holding together these bits of debris in the soil, because 50% of the weight of this soil is fungi. It's those threads, and they're holding everything together. These puffballs are living on the organic debris in the soil and breaking it down and recycling.
So Janet, can you tell us what this beauty is here?
This beauty is a hen of the woods, Gripilla frondosa. I like the frondosa bit because it's frondy. It's got lots of fronds, it's all one fungus. Underneath it's white, it's got pores, and that's where the spores are produced. It's attached to the base of this oak tree. It's a weak parasite, so it's not good for the tree, but it's not causing a lot of damage. The tree can live with it. It's annual, this fungus, but it will, with luck, appear next year.
And is it called hen of the woods because it's edible?
It is edible. I don't like telling people things are edible because nothing can be picked in the park.
So Janet, the sun's come out and we found something rather interesting here. Can you talk us through these lovely fungi?
Yes, this is a group of fungi that are, again, on this very old log, because on a new log you'll get certain fungi. As the log ages, different fungi will enjoy it for the food source. And if I come down here and show you the stem, did you hear the crack? Yeah. It's a brittle stem. So that's my first clue, both the colour of the spores, they'll be brown, and the fact that the stem is brittle and cracks That'll help me look in the book to find out what it is.
So what's this beauty here?
It's a GANODERMA. Again, you'll find it on wood because
Can you put your finger by it just to show the size of it?
it's breaking down the log that it's living on. You'll also find this on trees.
It's a bracket fungus.
It's a bracket fungus,
Right.
yes. Yeah. This one is new, and this white surface is the growing surface, and the white is also the place where the spores are produced. These are last year's. They're older, so they seem to have stopped growing, but often you get a new layer. You get a new layer each year.
Right. And they get really tough, the old ones. Really solid, wood-like, really.
They're hard.
Yeah.
Whereas another GANODERMA, the ones on the red oaks, you can do that and push your finger in and it's soft. So it's one way of being sure it is that, not this GANODERMA.
This just looks like a dead tree stump, but it's a bit special, isn't it?
It's very special because the fungi are just loving it. So right at the base, if we move around the other side, we've got an array. First of all, we've got a great big beefsteak fungus. This one, the red one, and on the corner there you can see the dripping blood. It really does look like a piece of beef. Next to it, there's a clump of sulphur tuft. They're very common. You see them in lots of places, called sulphur tuft because of the yellowy colour. Another beefsteak coming out, more sulphur tuft.
Oh wow, look at that.
A fantastic array.
Look at that, that's really beautiful.
And then round here, this is the next lot of sulphur tuft that's coming. So as the first lot die over, these are young ones.
Right.
Further on, we've got yet another fungus.
Wow.
This is MERIPILUS giganteus. Here, it's doing no harm. It's
MERIPILUS giganticus.
Sorry, giant polypore.
Giant polypore, right.
It's breaking down the wood in this old stump because fungi can break down lignin. Elsewhere in the park, this is a nightmare because it's damaging red oaks, damaging oaks, all sorts of things. It's a parasite. But at this time in its life, here, it's just breaking down the dead wood and recycling. So doing a good job for once.
So Janet, we've already talked a little bit about beefsteak fungi, but there's something rather special about this one, this red one here. Tell us
This
about
one
it.
is well eaten by slugs, and you can see the red juice that exudes from it dripping.
Oh dear, it's like
Very
blood.
close together. Close, you can see the long tubes here because the tubes on this are quite long, and the tubes, the spores are dropped at the bottom of the tubes. Next door to it, we have another clump, which is called spindleshank.
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 Right.
And I'll show you this one in my hands. You recognise it by this fat stem, which is then becoming quite narrow at the base, like a spindle. And it's tough. Look at that, the tough texture. So it's spindleshank. It again was growing as a clump at the base of this oak. It's not doing the oak much harm. It will cause a bit of rot. Those white threads are the mycelium, and those spread into the soil, exude their digestive enzymes, digest all sorts of dead material in the soil, and then reabsorb the nutrients.
So they're cleaning up the soil essentially.
They're also, some of the nutrients of the debris, like this bit of wood that they're breaking up, will be left in the soil and making it available, making those phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon available to plants. There's the fluffy mycelium.
Yeah. Yes.
And those mycelium are binding together all these little bits of fragments of wood, debris in the soil. So that's why they call the fungi the glue of the soil. We've got some very small fungi here called bird's nest fungi. If you look closely, you can see what looks like eggs, but that's packets of spores inside. Over there, those round heads, those are ones that are coming. They're going to, the top will break open and it will reveal the spores inside. growing on the wood chip. I pick up this piece of, you can see the mycelium which are holding the wood together. Came out of the wood that way, then it has, the cap has to be, the gills have to be vertical to the ground.
Right. And that's a mycena, is it?
That's a mycena, and that's why it bent like that. It came out sideways, but then it had to turn to make sure the cap, because the spores are made on the side of the gills, but it's got to be at, those gills have to be at right angles to the ground for the spores to drop.
Drop on the ground, right. And we've got a little crop of them down here.
A lovely crop of them.
Oh, it's beautiful, very pretty, isn't it?
This is both the remains and the beginnings of a stinkhorn. The white rocket-like cap is the end of the stinkhorn when all the black colouring with the spores has been taken away. And if you look at the stem, how open it is, it grows, and there's the slope that's been eating it. It grows very, very quickly because the cells are a large structure. That's where the egg, that's where it came from. We call it the witch's egg. And here, there's a big one that's coming, that's going to burst out. They grow very quickly and go over very quickly. Here's a familiar one, the parasol. Likes to grow in grassland, pop up all over the park, and as I come down you can see why it's called a parasol, and you can see the ring on the stem. Next door there's one that's on the ground. This, if I turn it over, you can see the white gills underneath. This, I think the stem had been eaten by slugs, that's why it fell over.
So Janet, we've got something rather exciting popping out of the ground here. What's this?
I think it's the fly agaric.
Ah.
The red one, red cap that everybody knows with white spots on it. Called the fly agaric because you can have little pieces of it in a dish of milk and it will kill flies.
And there's quite a few around here.
There are. Interestingly, this is pushing up through soil. Some fungi push up through asphalt.
Wow. So over here, wow, look at this.
We've got two here that have got a stage further. They've come above the ground, and on this one you can see a slight ring on the stem there at the base. Sometimes they're only red because the spots get washed off in the rain. Here's another fly agaric. It's soon going to drop its spores. It's got to open out a bit, flatten out, because the gills, it's got gills underneath like the shop mushroom that you buy, the gills have to be at right angles to the ground, and that's why you have a stalk holding the cap above the ground so that the spores can drop and blow away on the wind. And over here we've got another one.
Oh yeah.
You can see the gills very clearly, and this is getting towards the end of its life. The spores will have dropped and blown away. It's been eaten a little bit by a slug. That's fine, again, that's spreading its spores.
So Janet, we're by a young silver birch tree here, and you found something down here. What have we got?
This is a russula. They're also called brittle gills because the gills, actually, if you rub your finger across them, which I'm not going to do because there's only one here, they are very brittle. It's mycorrhizal, so this is the fruiting body, but under the ground the hyphae, the thin threads, which are like roots of the fungus, are attached to the roots of the birch. The mycorrhizal fungi feed the tree. They take sugars from the tree, but they feed the tree with nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. The Amanita muscari, which we have been looking at, that also is mycorrhizal, but that's more generalist. It'll be lots of different plants, lots of different trees rather. But the russulas, you'll get certain russulas with birch, different ones with oak, different ones with hornbeam or beech. They're often quite particular to where they grow, who they grow with. A birch tree here, and if I come down close to the ground, below the birch tree, is a mycorrhizal fungi, a fung attached to the root, which is a bolete. It's got pores underneath, and this is a birch bolete. You will find it where there are birch trees.